My name is Nadia Rahman, and for most of my life I learned to measure applause in silences, the little breaths between other people's claps. The half second of quiet where my own name should have lived. I didn't set out to become someone who speaks in the spaces between noise. It just happens when the people you love most teach you early that your victories are better kept small and tidy, tucked into drawers where they won't poke anyone else's pride. We were a family of 4 in a narrow house above our restaurant. The cedar spoon lime walls, mismatched chairs, and a kitchen that never slept. My father Imran could fillet a fish with the same steady patience he used to fix the flickering light in the stairwell. My mother Farah stretched dough into thin, translucent parathas that bubbled like laughter whenever oil hit the pan. Everything about them felt practiced and dependable. Except when it came to me. My brother Samir landed in the world glowing like a prophecy. I don't know if every older sibling looks at the new baby and feels their center tilt. But I remember thinking, not 5 years old, that something unseen had just stepped between me and my parents and set up residence there. Samir was sunshine blonde where I was dark, loud where I was careful. Hugs and skinned knees and the kind of smile that made waitresses slip him extra fries. He ran headlong at life, and life raised its arms like a parent ready to catch him. The stories we tell in our family came to orbit him. When Samir was 3, he charmed the policeman out of a ticket, my mother would say, wiping cumin from her hands. He looked up and said, "Sir, my Baba drives as carefully as he prays." My father would laugh, and they'd reenact the punchline with delight. When I asked how old I'd been when I first read a whole book alone, my mother's face creased with the effort of recalling an unimportant fact. 7, 8. Nadi, eat before it gets cold. I learned, little by little, to keep my good news within reach of my own heart. If I let it out, it drifted away from me like a helium balloon, all eyes chasing it up to the boy who collected everyone's gaze. Samir didn't ask to be their favorite. And sometimes I thought I saw him realize it's the way his eyes flitted to me when they bragged. The way he murmured, "Nads, your drawing is sick," as if he wanted that to count more. But that's the thing about a spotlight. You can't choose who it burns and who it leaves in the dark. At school, I made a new kind of family out of the underdogs who gathered on the carpeted steps of the library. We were the kids who liked the taste of words the way other kids liked Sour Patch gummies, sharp and addictive. Some days we built arguments for debate club in whispers, syllables snapping like fingers. And some days we performed monologues just for each other while Ms. Whitaker, the librarian, shushed us with the indulgent fierceness of someone who pretended to be stricter than she was. "Nadia," she would say, hooking reading glasses on the end of her nose. "Your voice has the kind of gravity that makes people lean forward." "I'm not loud like Samir," I'd reply, shrugging. "I don't know if people hear me." She'd tip her head, smile, tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You don't need to be loud when you're undeniable." Undeniable. The word felt like a seed I tucked behind my ribs, watering it with every page I turned, every practice speech I wrote, every lingering after-school hour spent breathing the air just above the library. Heaters that smelled faintly of dust and poetry. At home, the rhythms were different. The cedar spoon demanded full-bodied labor. Heat blooming around my temples as I took orders, refilled water jugs, and wiped tables with a rag that always smelled like lemon. My father trusted me with the register because my math was clean. And my mother trusted me with the floor because my face could hold a smile when my smile didn't feel like mine. The restaurant became a kind of stage where I learned to perform cheerfulness for tips and calm for chaos, sweeping the space between tables like a boundary line I enforced gently, relentlessly. Samir worked too, but his shifts were more spectacular. He'd pop into the kitchen with a baseball cap turned backward and kiss my mother's head. Then charm the bachelorette party at table 6 into ordering the sampler platters we needed to move that night. When he forgot to show up, my parents treated absence like a quirk. When I needed to miss a shift for debate regionals, my mother's mouth tightened. And my father reminded me, family business feeds us all. So I folded myself smaller into the seams. I did homework at the end of the counter between lulls, reading Toni Morrison beside the tip jar, building arguments about rhetorical strategy in the margins of receipts. I didn't resent the work. There's something holy about the dance of a busy night, the symphony of utensils, and the calandre response of the kitchen window. But I wanted someone to say, Nadia, you work like you're building a future, too. I wanted them to look up when I walked into a room and feel proud of the person I was trying to become. In 10th grade, I won my first debate tournament. It was a small one, just 3 schools in a neighboring district who could afford to rent a bus. We argued whether social media had done more harm than good for democracy. I paced back and forth, palms tingling, and let the words gather like rain clouds until they were too heavy to hold inside me. I did what Ms. Whitaker taught me: speak in stories, not facts. Make the facts sing inside the stories. I thought about how my father argued with a produce vendor, how my mother converted a complaint into a compliment that yielded a better Yelp review. I used every method of survival I knew and called it persuasion. We won. On the ride back to school, Mrs. Patel, our debate coach, handed me a plastic trophy shaped like a flame. This is yours, Nadia. You've lit the house. I went home with it wrapped in a sweater because the evening was too cold for triumph barefaced. The restaurant swelled with the Friday rush. My mother barely looked up, sweat shining like pearls along her hairline. Put your bag in the back, love. We're short a server. Samir is running late against all. You'll have to. I slipped the trophy out. We won. My father glanced over, eyes flicking from the flame to the pile of chits at his elbow. That's good, Beta. Get water to table 3. I felt something drop inside me soundlessly. I nodded. I filled the pitcher. The trophy spent 3 days in the walk-in fridge behind a crate of tomatoes because I had nowhere safe to put it. Nowhere it would be seen without being resented for needing to be seen. I told myself that recognition didn't matter, that the work was what mattered. But I pressed my palms against the cold metal of the fridge door every night and thought, I want to matter loudly to the people who raised me. Samir breezed in around 8 with that grin that forgave him everything. You mad? He asked softly when we passed each other near the soda fountain. He flicked my ear. Saw your text? Congrats, Nads. You're wicked smart. Thanks, I said, and meant it. He poured Sprite for the birthday kid at table 7 and copied the chorus of the pop song on the radio. High and silly, and the tables clapped in time as if all of us were friends. I watched the applause and did the calculus. If I were different, would the clapping have my name on it? If I were easy, careless, charming, if I gave them a show that cost me nothing, would they clap for me then? By junior year, I knew I wanted to pursue communications public policy. Speech writing. Some bridge between the world that eats us and the world we feed. I collected brochures under my bed and highlighted deadlines, sprinting between school, the Cedar Spoon, and the library, like someone who could outrun a life that wanted to weigh me down with guilt. I wrote scholarship essays until my wrists ached, telling judges about the smell of coriander on my palms and the way a girl learns to speak up in a house that asks her to swallow. Do you think your parents will let you go far? Ms. Whitaker asked one afternoon as the gray winter light turned the library windows into mirrors. Let me. The word startled me. I was so busy trying to be worthy that I hadn't considered permission. I'll ask. I said, which is different, softer. I'll build a case. She laughed. Then win it. But when I brought the brochures home, my mother squinted at the tuition numbers as if they were weapons. Financial aid, sure. But what about living? Who will pay for that? You will not be alone in some strange city, Nadia. Who will take care of you when you're sick? Who will wake you up for class? I've been waking myself up since middle school, I said. My voice trembled. I'll work. I can work. My father's knife stilled above a carrot. You already work. You will kill yourself. And for what? To write speeches? Be serious. Business is our backbone. Samir can't shape the restaurant alone. Why can't Samir be serious? I whispered, then louder when no one answered. Why is it always me who must be realistic? My mother blinked. Samir will be serious when it counts. And it always counted for me. That night, I fell asleep with my jaw aching from grinding my teeth, my chest tight with a familiar ache I had learned to rename as determination. I'll apply anyway. I promised the dark. I'll make it too good to refuse. Senior year assembled itself around me like a final test. College apps, debate finals, AP exams. Long shifts at the Cedar Spoon because winter breaks meant everyone had time for comfort food. Samir took a semester off from the community college he'd enrolled in to figure things out. And even though I knew my parents' disappointment pooled somewhere quiet inside them, they kept calling it a pause, not a failure. He is finding his path, my father would say. And I wanted so badly for someone to offer me a path that wasn't already paved by obligation. I wrote my Common App essay at 2 a.m., the restaurant's dishwasher thundering below us like the ocean. Tell us about a challenge you faced, the prompt said. And I wanted to write, sometimes love is a challenge when it refuses to look you in the eyes. Instead, I built a story about the night a pipe burst in the ceiling and how we saved the restaurant by moving all the tables onto the sidewalk and serving steaming plates under the streetlights until the plumber came. I wrote about how leadership is moving, what you can move, and forgiving yourself for what you can't. I signed my name with hands that shook. On a frigid March morning, a college with a name that felt like a hush in a cathedral emailed me. The subject line, "Congratulations." I opened it standing by the trash cans behind the restaurant, breath fogging. The warming scent of baked samosas drifting from the kitchen window. Full scholarship. Summer pre-orientation for first-generation students. A mentorship program. I sat on an overturned bucket and cried into my sleeve, the kind of crying that releases something deep and primitive. Then I wiped my face, pocketed the phone, and went upstairs to tell my parents with a careful smile. My mother listened, eyes darting to my father, to the stovetop, to the calendar where she tracked deliveries. "That is very good, Nadia," she said, rolling the words on her tongue like unfamiliar spices. "But let's just be calm. We need to think." My father nodded. "We'll discuss after dinner rush." Dinner rush. I told myself not to feel gutted when my triumph got slotted in between table turnovers and a korma special. But when 11 came and the last table left, my father sat with his ledger and never looked up. My mother stacked containers of leftovers into neat pyramids and said, "We'll talk this weekend." So I told Samir instead. He whooped, lifted me off my feet, and spun me like we were still small and unbreakable. "You're a beast, Nads." A full ride. "That's," he whistled, "you're getting out." "I don't want to get out," I said, smiling despite myself. "I want to get somewhere." He nodded, serious suddenly, his hand warm on the back of my neck. "Then go there." I slept light that week, riding a current of terror and hope. I kept seeing myself walking across a campus with ancient brick and aggressive ivy. Papers crammed under my arm, my voice sharper and truer. I also kept seeing my parents' faces collapsing into a grief that looked like betrayal. The Cedar Spoon was not just a business. It was a dream they had built with blistered hands and recipes smuggled from their mothers. A testament against a world that tried to tuck them into the corner. If I left, did I become the thing they'd always been afraid America would do, to us, pull us apart, make us strangers to ourselves? Around the same time, Mrs. Patel pushed me to enter an oratory competition in the spring bi-senior tradition. The finalists would perform at the graduation ceremony. The theme was home and belonging, which felt like a dare written specifically for me. I drafted speech after speech, piling pages like blankets that never warmed me. Everything I wrote sounded too polite or too angry, too eager to please or too eager to wound. The library printers clacked and spat while I bled sentences onto the margins. And Ms. Whitaker, queen of the line edit, circled my soft verbs in red. "What do you want to say, Nadia?" she asked, eyes kind and unsparing. "That I am made of this place," I whispered. "But also I can stay if I want to survive." Then say that, not the Hallmark version, the bone version. So I cut the metaphors until the truth showed through like ribs. I wrote about washing rice until the water ran clear with hands so cold they trembled. I wrote about learning English idioms through customers' jokes and the way laughter always came a beat late for me. I wrote about the first time a teacher said my last name wrong and the 1,000 times I let it slide because there were checks to cash and floors to mop and kindness to make. Because confrontation had a cost. I practiced the speech behind the restaurant between deliveries, my breath little ghosts in the air. Home, I said aloud to the empty alley, is where the work of your love gets taken for granted. Belonging is when the work of your love gets seen. It wasn't what the judges would expect. I knew that. It didn't promise easy redemptions. But it felt like the thing I needed to say before I could move my body into a bigger world. 2 weeks before graduation, I picked up a stack of RSVP cards for the ceremony from the school office and brought them to the restaurant so my parents could fill them out and request seating near the front. For family of honorees, the note said, because finalists in the oratory competition were considered special guests. I watched my mother flip the card over twice without reading. Your father will handle it, she said, which meant no. My father slid the card into a drawer with the pens we never found when we needed them and said, we'll see. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the freezer below my room. What if they don't come? The thought wrenched something deep in my chest. No, they'll come. They just don't know how to show excitement without worrying about everything that might go wrong. That was the story I told myself because it kept me from collapsing. And it was sometimes true. But another story nipped at its heels. What if their silence is not fear, but punishment? What if their way of controlling me is pretending I am small until I agree to stay small? The next morning, I asked my mother outright at the counter while we rolled cutlery into napkins. Are you not coming to graduation? She didn't look up. Graduation is for you. Exactly, I said, trying to laugh. It would be nice if my parents were there. She sighed. Nadia, we have a catering order that day for the Eid community potluck. 50 trays. Who will oversee? Your father cannot be everywhere. Samir can help, but you know how he is with details. It is a bad day to leave the restaurant. A lot of parents are leaving their work that day, I said, smaller. Other people don't run a restaurant, she said gently, as if patience could erase cruelty. You will have your life. We support your life by keeping this one running. I stared at her hands, strong, beautiful, butter and flour woven into the grooves like a second skin. I wanted to wrap my arms around her and beg. I also wanted to slap the counter until the silverware jumped. Instead, I nodded and left a bus at table, my feelings stacking inside me like dirty plates I could clean later. I didn't tell Mrs. Patel or Ms. Whitaker that my parents might not come. Pride can wear so many costumes. Mine dressed up as competence. I told myself that the real audience was the sea of caps and the rows of teachers who'd written me letters. That I didn't need a camera flash from row B to validate my years of work. Still, sometimes I caught myself practicing the angle of my smile for a crowd where my mother's face didn't exist. One afternoon, I found Samir in the restaurant office, really, a broom closet with a desk and a calendar of sassy cat sand. I closed the door behind me. Are you coming to graduation? He spun in the chair. Of course. I'll bring a whistle. Don't you dare, I said, laughing. Then the laugh dissolved. Mama says they can't come. The catering. His face softened into something almost paternal. I'll talk to them. Don't make it worse, I begged. Don't make it about you. He put his hands up. Okay. Then quieter. I see you, Nads, even when they don't. I didn't answer because my throat had gone tight and painful. I left the office and smiled at the table, for like practicing joy was a debt I owed to strangers. Finals week slid by in a pool of sleeplessness and adrenaline. My oratory piece was selected as a finalist. The principal emailed, "We're honored to feature you." I replied with more gratitude than felt safe. I rehearsed in the auditorium after school, the air cool and full of dust motes like confetti that had gotten lost. I stood on stage and stared out at the sea of empty red seats, placed an imaginary mother in row C, and spoke to her. Home is where the work of your love gets taken for granted, I said, and pictured her flinch. Belonging is when the work of your love gets seen, I said, and pictured her eyes filling. On the last Saturday before graduation, the Eid order turned into an emergency. The community center doubled the number of trays after a miscommunication. And my father, stubbornly heroic, announced that we could manage with just the 4 of us. We cooked until the restaurant smelled like a market at noon. Onion cardamom. Meat. Sweetness sans Samir stacked aluminum trays into towers. At midnight, my mother sent us all home with leftovers, pressing a plastic container into my hands as if feeding me could fix the thing inside me that had stopped accepting comfort. In the stairwell, Samir touched my shoulder. "They'll come," he said. "Trust me." "I don't know how to do that," I admitted. He thought for a moment. "Okay, then trust me. I'll make sure they come." "You can't make people care," I said, exhausted, and moved past him. But his voice followed me up to my room. "Sometimes you can make it impossible for them to pretend they don't." That night I slept hard and dreamed of a stage that kept receding each time I walked toward it, the seats stretching into a horizon. When I woke, the sunlight came in hot and unapologetic, and I felt the habit of the day settle onto me like armor. I rolled out of bed, stretched, and told the mirror, "You're undeniable," even if I didn't believe it yet. The cedar spoon needed me for the lunch rush. The speech needed polishing. The RSVP cards were still in the drawer. My parents were still my parents, and I was still their daughter, built out of their contradictions and my own stubborn hope. I went downstairs. The light in the restaurant was pretty in that way it gets when the front windows are freshly cleaned. My mother stood at the counter counting coins. My father sharpened a knife in long, even strokes. Samir was late, but he'd texted that he was bringing coffee. "Morning," I said, trying to sound normal. "Morning," my parents chorused, not looking up. My mother pushed a paper bag toward me. "Can you run this to Mr. Khan's shop?" "Sure," as I tucked the receipts into the bag. The thought came uninvited. This is what love looks like here. Tasks, not tenderness. Not because they didn't feel, but because feeling was a luxury our lives didn't always allow. Still, I wanted both. I wanted the errands and the embrace. I wanted the work and the words. I wanted the applause and the silence that meant someone was listening. On the way back from Mr. Khan's, I passed the school auditorium. The janitor propped the door open, and I slipped inside. The stage looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more honest. I walked to the center and stood on the tape decks where the finalists would stand, and I listened for my heartbeat. It came steady, then faster, then steady again, like footsteps approaching. I closed my eyes and let my future self walk toward me from the far side of the stage. A girl with a diploma and a train ticket. A girl whose parents were maybe not in the seats, but whose voice filled the room anyway. "Home," I whispered to the empty air, "is where I learned to work. Belonging is where that work sings." I opened my eyes. I didn't know then that the night of graduation would taste like lemon and smoke. That my voice would crack and then strengthen. That I would bend the room toward me and then snap it back. I didn't know that people would stand even when the people I loved most stayed seated. I didn't know that justice sometimes arrives in the clap of strangers' hands. A wave you can ride until you find your own. I knew only that I was walking into the week that would change how I measured applause, and that I had to make my steps count. So I went back to the restaurant, tied on my apron, and made myself smaller again for one more day so that when I finally stepped onto that stage, there would be space for the woman I needed to become to expand without hitting anything and shattering graduation. Day dawned hot and relentless. The kind of June morning where the air feels thick enough to chew. I woke before my alarm, heart already tapping against my ribs like it had been up all night rehearsing. My cap and gown hung from the closet door, black polyester that smelled faintly of dust and dye. I touched it with the same reverence I'd once used to touch the glass trophies in the library display case. This was supposed to be mine, the culmination of everything I had folded and hidden and carried. I dressed slowly, braiding my hair twice because my hands shook, pinning it tight so no strand would escape. The gown felt heavy when I slipped it on, heavier than it should have. Like the fabric had absorbed every unspoken word I'd swallowed in 17 years. In the mirror, I looked older, not because of the makeup. I finally allowed myself, but because my eyes seemed to know something my face hadn't caught up to yet. Samir knocked on my door just as I slipped on my shoes. He leaned against the frame, tie askew, suit jacket thrown over his shoulder like he'd stepped out of someone else's life. "Look at you," he said, grinning. Ms. Valedictorian vibes. I'm not valedictorian, I reminded him, though part of me wanted to hear it again. You might as well be. You're the only one people are going to remember. His voice softened. I'm proud of you, Nads. I smiled. Small, but true. Thanks. We walked down to the restaurant together. My parents were already bustling, my father chopping cilantro, her mother labeling foil trays stacked in precarious towers for the Eid catering. The kitchen smelled like cumin and cardamom, sharp and festive. A cruel reminder that life at the Cedar Spoon didn't pause for milestones. Morning, I said, voice too bright. My mother looked up briefly, her scarf slipping as sweat dampened her temples. You're ready. Yes, eat something, she said, sliding a plate of eggs toward me. You'll faint otherwise. I wasn't hungry, but I forced down a few bites, each chew like gravel. Will you be there? I asked before I could lose my nerve. My father wiped his knife on a rag. We will try beta. The catering must go smoothly. Samir's eyes narrowed, but he stayed silent. I nodded, though my chest clenched so hard it hurt. Okay, I whispered. I wanted to scream it's my graduation, but the words calcified before they reached my tongue. The bus ride to the Civic Center, where the ceremony would be held, was loud with laughter and camera flashes. Parents carried balloons and flowers, their joy loud enough to shake the bus windows. I sat by the aisle, hands folded in my lap, pretending not to notice the empty seats where my parents should have been. Samir had promised he'd meet me there, but promises felt fragile that morning. Inside the auditorium, everything smelled of polished wood and anticipation. Students lined up alphabetically in the wings while ushers guided families into rows. Through the curtains, I glimpsed fathers in pressed shirts and mothers with eyes shining, hands clapping when their kids waved. The sound rose like a tide. Each clap another reminder of what might not be waiting for me. My turn came. Rahman, Nadia, the principal called. I stepped forward, legs trembling beneath the weight of my gown. The stage lights hit me like interrogation lamps, hot and merciless. I heard the rustle of programs, the polite applause that greeted every student. I looked instinctively toward row C, where I'd imagined my parents' faces. But the seats were empty. Empty. The sight sliced through me like glass. For others, the applause swelled, names followed by whistles, cheers, full-body joy. When it was my name, the claps were scattered. Polite, impersonal. No one shouted. No one stood. The silence of my own bloodline rang louder than all the other noise. I smiled tightly, took my diploma folder, and walked across as if nothing had fractured. Inside, I was falling. They didn't clap for me. The thought repeated itself, sharp and merciless. Not even once. Not even today. After the diplomas, the oratory finalists lined up. My stomach twisted as I gripped my note cards, though I'd memorized every word. My speech wasn't just practice, it was marrow. As I waited, I scanned the crowd again, desperate, foolish. My mother's scarf, my father's steady profile, nothing. Samir, maybe, a shadow near the back, standing, waving. I blinked hard, but the stage lights blurred everything into anonymity. The first speaker went, then the second. Polite applause. Finally, my name. Our final orator, Nadia Rahman. I walked to the podium, breath shallow, pulse a roar in my ears. The microphone hummed as I leaned in. Home, I began, my voice steadier than I felt, is where the work of your love gets taken for granted. Belonging is when the work of your love gets seen. A hush fell. I told them about the rice washed until water ran clear. About laughter arriving late in a new language. About standing in a restaurant that demanded every ounce of me and wondering if anyone noticed the girl behind the counter. I let my voice tremble when it needed to, sharpen when the truth demanded it. I didn't look for my parents anymore. I looked at the strangers whose eyes widened, whose hands gripped their programs tighter. I looked at the teachers who had circled verbs in red, who had told me I was undeniable. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. My heart braced for polite claps, the kind you give when you don't know what else to do. And then cheering. Applause that started like rain on a tin roof and grew into a storm. People stood. Whole rows rose. The sound rolled over me, drowning out the ache in my chest. But in that swell of validation, the absence of my family rang louder. The crowd was on its feet, but the seats I had saved in my heart stayed cold and empty. I bowed my head, blinked back the hot sting in my eyes, and whispered to myself, "Remember this. Remember both things at once, the silence of those you love and the thunder of those who see you anyway." When the ceremony ended, clusters of families flooded the aisles, hugging, snapping pictures, holding bouquets. I stood by the exit program, clutched in my damp hands, scanning desperately for Samir, for anyone. Minutes ticked by. Students left in waves, laughter trailing behind them like ribbons. I was still waiting when the janitors began folding chairs. Finally, Samir appeared, hair mussed, shirt untucked. He looked winded. "Nads, I'm sorry I was stuck traffic, I swear." "Did you they?" "They didn't come," I said, voice flat. "They didn't clap." The words felt like lead dropping out of my mouth. His jaw tightened. "I'll kill them." "I swear, no," I cut him off. Don't. Because anger couldn't fill the hollow inside me. Nothing could, not then. We walked out together into the hot dusk, the echoes of applause still buzzing in my ears, clashing with the silence that had carved itself into me. When Samir and I stepped out into the parking lot, the heat of the day had softened into evening, but inside me it was still blazing. My gown clung to my back, my palms damp against the diploma folder. Parents and kids clustered around cars, balloons bobbing, flowers crushed in embraces. I tried not to watch, but every squeal of joy, every click of a camera shutter dug into me like a thorn. "They didn't clap," I murmured again, because the disbelief kept circling me like a hawk. "They didn't even show up." Samir's jaw was tight. He kicked at the asphalt, keys jangling in his fist. "Nads, I swear. I tried to drag them out of that kitchen. Mama said the catering couldn't wait. Baba said reputation comes first. I told them this was your day, but what?" I snapped, the hurt spilling into anger. But feeding strangers mattered more than clapping for their own daughter. He winced. "I don't know how to defend it. I don't think I can." Silence sat heavy between us. Cars pulled out, horns beeped. I hugged the diploma tighter, like proof I existed. Finally, Samir sighed. Come on. Let's at least get ice cream or something. You can't go home like this." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to curl up somewhere dark. But the thought of walking straight back into the restaurant, into the steam and chatter, into my parents' eyes, that would not meet mine, was unbearable. "Fine," I whispered. We drove in silence, the radio low. A custard stand near the river was crowded with families, laughter spilling into the humid night. I couldn't step out. The contrast was too cruel. Samir saw it too. He bought 2 cones and brought them to the car, handing me one like an apology. "For what it's worth, you were incredible. People were crying during your speech." "Strangers?" I said bitterly. "Strangers cried. My parents didn't even hear it." He didn't argue. He just sat with me, ice cream melting faster than we could eat. That night, when I finally went home, the restaurant was still alive. The catering trays had returned empty, stacked in greasy towers. My mother's scarf hung on the back of a chair, damp with sweat. My father counted bills at the counter, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're back," my mother said, almost cheerfully, as if I'd gone to the movies. I dropped the diploma folder on the table. "I graduated today." "Yes," she said, nodding, hands busy folding foil. "Congratulations. We're proud." "Proud." My voice cracked. "You weren't there. You didn't clap. You didn't even." My throat closed. My father glanced up, expression unreadable. "Nadia, we told you." "The restaurant, forget it," I said, my whole body trembling. "I don't want to hear excuses." I turned and fled upstairs before the tears could break loose. In my room, the applause of strangers echoed in my head. But louder still was the silence of my parents. The following week, I returned to the library to return my gown and cap. The building was cool, quiet. The smell of paper thick in the air. Ms. Whitaker spotted me immediately, her glasses perched low, her smile warm. "There she is," she said, "our star." I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. Thanks. You should have seen the faculty afterward, she continued, eyes shining. Half of them were saying it was the best speech they'd ever heard at graduation. Some were even talking about using it as a teaching example. My heart twisted. Really? Really? And your parents? She looked at me knowingly. They weren't there, I admitted, voice small. Her face softened, sadness flickering. I'm sorry, Nadia. I swallowed hard. It's fine. But she leaned closer, lowering her voice. It's not fine. And I want you to know something. After your speech, the superintendent pulled me aside. He asked about your background, your work, your scholarship. He said your story reminded him of his own daughter. Do you know what he said? I shook my head. He said, that girl is going to change things, and I'm going to make sure she gets every door opened. The words hit me like a jolt. Every door opened. Ms. Whitaker squeezed my hand. You think you don't belong because your parents didn't clap? But not you people in power saw you. People who can lift you higher than you imagine. Tears stung my eyes. For the first time, I felt the ground shift. Maybe this silence at home didn't have to define me. Maybe strangers could see me more clearly than blood ever could. That weekend, as I sorted through mail, I stumbled upon a letter tucked under a stack of menus on the restaurant counter. It was addressed to me from the scholarship board. My heart leaped. I tore it open. Inside was a notice. Recipient is invited to a recognition banquet. Family attendance encouraged. I stared at the RSVP. It was dated 2 weeks earlier. The deadline had passed. My stomach dropped. Mama. I called. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands. Yes. I held up the letter. Why didn't you give this to me? Her eyes flickered, guilt flashing before it hardened. We get so much mail. It must have slipped. Slipped. My voice rose. This was my recognition banquet. They wanted you there. You hid it. She bristled. We didn't hide. We protected you. These events are unnecessary showpieces. You already have the scholarship. I shook my head, the betrayal cutting deep. You didn't want me to shine? You didn't want anyone else to clap for me. She flinched, lips tightening. We work hard so you can have a future. That is our applause. But I saw it now, the pattern, the truth. Every silence, every dismissal, every excuse. It wasn't just neglect. It was fear. Fear that if the world saw me, I would leave them behind. And they were right. I would. That night, Samir knocked on my door. His face was pale, eyes stormy. I heard you yelling. What happened? I showed him the letter. His jaw clenched. They hid this from you. Nads, that's, he broke off, fists tightening. They don't want me to leave, I whispered. That's why they don't clap. If they clap, it means admitting I'm worth more than this restaurant. Samir's eyes glistened. You are worth more. You always were. I swallowed hard. Then I have to go, even if they hate me for it. He nodded slowly. Then go, and let them sit with their silence. 2 days later, Mrs. Patel, my debate coach, called. Nadia, I have news. The district board is organizing a feature on student achievers. They want to interview you, film it, actually for a public piece. You'll talk about your speech, your scholarship, your story. It'll be shown at the community center next month. My breath caught. Publicly. In front of everyone. Yes. And your family will be invited. I froze. The thought of my parents sitting in the audience, forced to hear strangers clap for me, sent a shiver down my spine. Humiliation for them. Vindication for me. I'll do it, I said. My voice was steady now. Because maybe that was the justice I'd been waiting for, the moment when the truth would no longer stay hidden in our kitchen drawers. When the silence would finally be drowned out by undeniable applause. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling fan, the letter crumpled in my fist. The silence in my house was the same as always. But inside me, something had shifted. The world outside my parents' narrow walls was listening. The superintendent, the district, the strangers who had risen to their feet, they had heard me. They had seen me. And soon, my family would have no choice but to hear and see too. I whispered the words to myself again. Like armor, undeniable, unstoppable. Mine because the humiliation of graduation wasn't the ending. It was the spark. The twist wasn't that my parents failed MIT, was that their silence had made me louder. And the next time I stepped onto a stage, there would be no place for them to hide from the sound. The weeks between graduation and the community recognition event felt like a strange purgatory. By day, I worked at the restaurant balancing trays and smiling for customers. By night, I prepared for the interview Mrs. Patel had arranged, practicing answers in the mirror until the girl staring back at me looked less like a daughter and more like a young woman rehearsing for a new life. My parents said little. They didn't mention the banquet they had hidden, didn't bring up graduation, didn't ask about the feature. The silence became its own language, each unspoken word, heavy, deliberate. I carried it like a weight in my chest, but underneath it burned a defiance I hadn't felt before. You tried to hide me, I thought whenever my mother averted her eyes. But I'm already seen. The recognition program was held at the community center's largest hall, the same place where the Eid potlucks took place, where I had once served trays of samosas while the adults chatted above my head. Now my name was printed on the program, bold and impossible to ignore. When Samir and I arrived, the hall was already buzzing. Parents adjusted cameras. Students in dress clothes fidgeted, their nervous laughter filling the air. Teachers and district officials shook hands, the smell of catered food trailing behind them. I wore a blue dress that Mrs. Patel had insisted on buying for me. Something that makes you feel like yourself, she had said. The fabric swished around my knees, soft and light, a far cry from the heavy gown of graduation day. As I scanned the crowd, my stomach tightened. Near the back, I saw them, my parents. My mother in her dark scarf, my father in the same pressed shirt he wore for weddings. Their faces were composed, but their eyes darted nervously, like they weren't sure how to exist in a room where they weren't in control. They came, I whispered, half in disbelief. Samir smirked. Told you. I cornered them. Said if they skipped this too, they'd regret it forever. My throat tightened. Regret was something my parents rarely allowed themselves. But tonight they would have no choice. The superintendent opened the evening with a speech about resilience, about students who had overcome odds to achieve greatness. My name was mentioned early, woven into his examples. I felt my mother's gaze on me, sharp as a knife, but I didn't turn. One by one, students walked on stage to receive certificates, their families cheering loudly from the audience. The applause was warm, enveloping, safe. I sat waiting, my hands clenched in my lap, the memory of silence from graduation still echoing. Finally, the announcer called, "Our final honoree this evening is Nadia Rahman." I stood, my legs steady, my heart a drum. The applause began polite at first, then growing. Teachers rose. Classmates clapped harder, some whistling. By the time I reached the stage, the sound was swelling into something thunderous. I looked out and saw what I had been waiting for, the entire hall rising to its feet. A standing ovation. The sight made my knees weaken, tears pricking behind my eyes. This was the moment I had imagined on sleepless nights, the moment the silence of my family would be swallowed whole by the roar of strangers who saw me. But my parents, they remained seated, rigid, my mother's lips pressed tight, my father's hands folded in his lap. Their refusal was deliberate, a wall they still clung to. And somehow, that made the ovation sweeter, because it proved what I had always known. I didn't need their clap to validate me. The world clapped anyway. When the ovation finally softened, the moderator invited me to the podium for a short Q&A. Cameras pointed toward me, the red recording lights glowing. I swallowed hard, adjusted the microphone, and spoke. "My name is Nadia Rahman," I began. "I am the daughter of immigrants who built their lives on work so heavy it bent their backs but never their pride. I grew up in a restaurant, learning that service can feed you, but silence can starve you. Tonight, I want to say something I wish I had heard sooner. You are allowed to want more than survival. You are allowed to be seen." The hall was quiet, leaning forward, breathing with me. I let my voice steady. At graduation, when I walked across the stage, the people I wanted most to hear me didn't. They were busy, they said. But I learned something. Applause doesn't come only from blood. Sometimes it comes from strangers who recognize your worth before your family ever does. And that's okay. Because belonging isn't who claps the loudest, it's who can't ignore your voice when you finally speak. There was a pause, a heartbeat, where the weight of my words filled the room. And then applause again, louder than before, rolling through the hall like thunder breaking a storm. I blinked back tears, but inside me something unfurled like wings I hadn't dared to stretch. As I stepped off the stage, people surged forward, teachers hugging me, students slapping my back, strangers shaking my hand. Cameras flashed. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. And then I saw them, my parents, still in their seats, surrounded by standing people. Their refusal to rise had made them conspicuous, like stones in a flowing river. Eyes turned toward them, whispers buzzing. "That's her family," someone murmured. Why didn't they stand? They look embarrassed. I watched my mother's face redden, my father's jaw tighten. The silence they had once used to diminish me was now humiliating them, making them small in a room that refused to let me shrink. Justice, not loud, not cruel, just undeniable. When the event ended, families clustered again for photos. My parents approached reluctantly, Samir trailing behind. My mother's voice was tight. "You embarrassed us tonight." I turned, stunned. "I embarrassed you." By being honored. By speaking of family business in public, my father snapped, his eyes dark. "Some things stay private." My hands shook, but I didn't back down. "You left me alone on the most important day of my life. You hid my banquet invitation. And you think my honesty embarrassed you? No. Your silence embarrassed you." Gasps rippled nearby. A few teachers turned their heads, pretending not to listen, but I knew they heard. My parents' eyes darted, realizing the audience had shifted. No longer just mine, but theirs too. Samir stepped forward, his voice sharp. "She deserved your support. If you can't clap for your own daughter, then don't blame her for finding people who will." My parents froze, speechless. Around us, families gathered their things, but I knew whispers would spread. In our community, stories traveled fast. Tonight's story would not be about the restaurant or the catering trays. It would be about the girl who stood on stage and the parents who refused to stand with her. Later, outside, under the warm night air, people stopped me again and again. "Your speech moved me. You remind me of my daughter. You're going places." Their words piled into me, brick by brick, building something solid. Samir grinned, clapping me on the back. "See? They can't ignore you anymore." For the first time, I believed it. I glanced back through the glass doors of the hall. My parents lingered at the edge of the crowd, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Their silence wasn't power anymore. It was isolation and me. I was walking into a world that had already risen to its feet. That night, as I lay in bed, the echoes of applause still rang in my ears. Not the polite claps of obligation, not the hollow silence of my family, but the roar of an entire audience who stood because they couldn't help it. It was the justice I hadn't known. I was waiting for the moment their silence turned against them. And my voice rose above it. I whispered into the dark, steady and sure. "I don't need their clap anymore. The world claps for me, and I will never be quiet again." The night after the recognition banquet, I didn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I felt something shift inside me. Something I had carried for years was finally loosening its grip. The applause, the standing ovation. The faces turned toward me with pride instead of dismissal. It all replayed in my head like a film reel I didn't want to stop. For once, the silence in my house didn't crush me. It almost felt irrelevant. My parents retreated to their room after the event, speaking in hushed tones behind closed doors, but I didn't strain to listen. Their words no longer held the power to define me. When sunlight filtered through my curtains, I rose with a sense of lightness I hadn't known before. I brewed tea in the kitchen, letting the steam curl around my face, and sat by the window with my journal. For years, I had written in its pages scribbled notes about speeches, quotes that inspired me, confessions I couldn't say aloud. This time, my pen moved differently. Not with longing, but with clarity. I don't need to beg for their applause. My worth doesn't shrink in their silence. I was never invisible. I was just standing in the wrong room. Samir stumbled in, hair messy, eyes still foggy with sleep. He poured cereal into a bowl and flopped into the chair across from me. "So, you going to let it sink in that you basically set the place on fire last night?" I smiled softly. "It's sinking in." He leaned forward, his grin fading into something more serious. "I'm proud of you, Nads. Always was. But last night? I think everyone finally saw what I've seen all along." His words landed gently but firmly, like stones building a foundation under my feet. Later that day, I found my parents in the restaurant. The lunch rush hadn't started yet. The air smelled faintly of onions, sizzling in oil. They sat at the counter, papers spread out, their silence thick. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "I know you were embarrassed last night." My mother's eyes flicked up, then away. My father's jaw tightened. Neither spoke. "I need you to understand something," I continued, my voice steady. "I love this family. I love what you've built here. But I can't stay small so that you can feel safe. I won't. I've worked too hard, and I've been seen by too many people who believe in me. You don't have to clap for me if you can't, but you can't stop the world from doing it." Silence again, but this time I wasn't crushed by it. "I'm leaving in the fall," I said finally. "I'm going to take that scholarship and I'm going to make a life for myself. I hope you'll be part of it. But if you choose not to, I'll still be okay." Their faces revealed nothing. My father looked down at his ledger. My mother's hands twisted her scarf. But neither of them stopped me. And that in itself was an answer. The weeks that followed were different. I worked my shifts at the restaurant, but the heaviness was gone. Customers who had been at the banquet stopped me to say, "We saw you speak," or "We're proud of you." Some even asked for copies of my speech, which Mrs. Patel helped me print and distribute. The applause followed me in quiet ways, nods from neighbors, emails from teachers, even a postcard from the superintendent congratulating me again. It wasn't about ego anymore. It was about knowing my words had weight. Samir, too, seemed changed. He started showing up more consistently, taking on responsibilities in the restaurant with a focus I hadn't seen before. One evening, as we wiped down tables, he said, "Maybe this is my place, you know? Maybe I was always meant to stay and keep this running so you could go out there and fight bigger battles." I looked at him, my chest tight with love. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to." He shrugged. "Maybe I want to. But the difference is I want the choice. And you gave me that, Nads, by choosing for yourself." August arrived like a drumbeat, counting down the days until I left for college. I packed my life into 2 suitcases, slipping my journal into the front pocket. The restaurant buzzed with its usual chaos, but beneath it I felt an undercurrent of something new. The night before I left, I stood in the doorway of the kitchen. My parents were working, as always. I cleared my throat. "I'm leaving in the morning." My father didn't look up. My mother murmured, "Safe travels." That was all. No hugs, no tears, no words of pride. And for the first time, I didn't crumble. Because I knew what waited for me beyond those doors. A world already clapping, already listening. On the drive to campus, I leaned my forehead against the window, watching the city shrink behind me. Samir drove, humming along to the radio, occasionally glancing at me with a grin that said, "You did it." I thought about applause. How I had once believed it had to come from family to matter. How I had twisted myself into silence, hoping to earn it. How their refusal had nearly broken me. But then I thought of the library, of Ms. Whitaker's steady encouragement, of Mrs. Patel's faith, of the superintendent's words, of the hall rising to its feet in thunderous ovation. They didn't clap for me. I thought a small smile curving my lips. But the whole audience stood up anyway. And maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes family is who raises you, and sometimes family is who rises for you. Weeks later on campus, I stood in a lecture hall full of strangers who would soon be classmates. The professor asked us to introduce ourselves with one word that described what we hoped to find here. When it was my turn, I hesitated only a moment before answering. Belonging, I said. Heads nodded, eyes met mine, and I felt it. The start of something new. Because belonging wasn't about whether my parents clapped. It was about the people who couldn't help but rise when they heard my voice. It was about claiming my place in the world unapologetically. And as I sat back down, heart steady, I whispered to myself, undeniable, unstoppable. Mine, I don't know if my parents will ever clap for me. Maybe one day, when I've built something so undeniable they can't look away, they will. Or maybe they won't. But what I know now is this. My story isn't about their silence. It's about the moment the silence lost its power. And that moment came when a room full of strangers stood for me, reminding me that my voice, my work, my worth, none of it depended on the people who refused to see it. So I moved forward carrying that truth like a banner, unshakable. They didn't clap for me, but the whole audience stood up anyway. And that's how I learned. Sometimes the people you expect to clap for you won't. But life has a way of giving you a louder, stronger audience when you refuse to stay silent. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video. It tells me you want more stories just like this. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you've never missed the next tale of family, betrayal, and ultimate justice. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt unseen by the very people you needed most? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, even if they don't clap, the world is still waiting to stand for you.